grainy black and white footage of the League of Empire Loyalists from the 1950s, if you view footage of Colin Jordan, if you view footage of the White Defence League, if you view later footage of the National Front, if you view footage of the one-man march in Hyde, Manchester, where thousands of screaming, smelly, dirty, slimy, communist, Marxist, Trotskyist, Maoist scum was shouting at him. He did a one-man march with a Union Jack through that and wasn't fazed at all. He was the best organiser the National Front ever had. And he's still organising now, today, 2016. He is the organiser and founder of the Forgotten British Heroes campaign. He is Martin Webster.
Thank you, everybody. I haven't got very much to add to what our friend and colleague Peter Rushton had to say about Misrahi. I want to update you on what we've been trying to do since we last had one of these ceremonies and a meeting like this. Because, and this was pre-Brexit, because Britain was then, and still is now for the moment, hopefully a very short moment, a member of the European community, we thought that the British government would have an interest in its, as part of its overall campaign to stop terrorism and to arrest people engaged in terrorist activities, would wish to have an interest in arresting all kinds of terrorists. Perhaps we were naive, perhaps we were being deliberately naive. But anybody who's got any clue about the development of terrorism in the world since the Second World War will acknowledge, whether or not they are anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish or whatever, that the founders of modern-day terrorism were the Jews. They founded all sorts of clever things, and they adapted and developed all sorts of genius things in the art market, in the financial market, whatever other market. They're entrepreneurs, they really develop things. And you've heard them quoted by Peter here about nothing can stand up against sophisticated, clever planning. They were the inventors, for example, of the barrel bomb, which became notorious in the fighting between ISIS and the government of Syria in recent couple of years. But all sorts of vile terrorist activities were first invented by these Zionist terrorist groups, the Lumi and their breakaway faction that was even more extreme, the Lehi, the so-called Stern Gang. Now, we thought we must approach this as if we would be treated as ordinary citizens with ordinary rights. And we thought the first port of call would be writing to our Home Secretary, as she then was last year, Theresa May, giving her information about this vile toad here, Misrahi, giving information about the bombing of the Colonial Club and about his, and certainly his gang's involvement in the evisceration of a boy in his 20s who worked a parcel addressed to R. Farron, his name was Rex Farron, and it was addressed to his brother, who had another R in his name, and he opened the parcel and his guts were blown out. I believe Peter's got photographs which are possibly too appalling to publish, of photographs taken of the murder scene by the forensic people as they were in those days. Now, this is an awful crime to commit, to be involved with. Surely the British Home Secretary would wish to have the person responsible for such a crime brought to justice. We wrote to her. She couldn't even be bothered to reply to us herself. She got some little nobody some Sir Humphrey or deputy to Sir Humphrey write us back saying that, oh, now the law has changed a bit since we're in the European Union. We now no longer issue extradition requests to foreign countries. We work through the European Union, and this is a matter for the police to apply for a European arrest warrant. So, we rehearsed all the information again for the attention of the Commissioner of Metropolitan Police, Sir Hogan Howe, and he did what all government civil servants do, and he is a government civil servant. He's appointed ultimately by Parliament, by the will of the Prime Minister, though he's supposed to act independently once appointed. He immediately transferred the job to somebody else. And that somebody else, his next rank down, immediately transferred it to another somebody else. And eventually we got a reply from the Commander, Dean Hayden, who is the commander of the anti-terrorist squad, or network, or whatever it's called now. They give themselves fabulously elaborate titles. And he wrote us back, and it's interesting that though the letter wasn't posted to us until the 14th of April this year, it was dated the 1st of April. Saying no, they were too busy to pursue this matter. Too busy. Now, it's always very boring to read out long text, but I hope you'll forgive me if I read out what Peter Rushton and I sent in reply to him on Wednesday 18th May to his, oh, we're far too busy. Would you mind if I read this out to you?
Can you verbatim tell us what the reply was for this?
No. I've told you his reply was, in short, we're too busy. And we said, we along with our colleagues wish we could thank you for your letter dated 1st April, but we note that nobody thought it important enough to post it until 14th April. It was not available at our PO box until a week after that. In these strange circumstances, we wonder if the date you put on your letter was a joke. We regret that our representation to Commissioner Hogan Howe about acts of terrorism against British service personnel and their families by Robert Misrahi and his Zionist Lehi associate should be treated by you with levity. We reject your suggestion that because Misrahi's terrorism was perpetrated in the late 1940s, it is not now worth pursuing. There is no statute of limitation for murder. The police have never been slow to react sympathetically to demands from leading Zionists, such as the late Greville Janner, for the extradition and prosecution of those accused of crimes against Jews. We did not suggest that the copies of MI5 files on Misrahi we provided, and we note that you don't dispute their authenticity, to represent a complete case against Misrahi, but we do think they constitute good grounds for conducting an investigation. Furthermore, there is more evidence to be had against Misrahi. For example, the late Professor David Cesarani's 2009 book, Major Farron's Hat, Murder, Scandal and Britain's War Against Jewish Terrorism, 1945 to 48. In this, the professor discusses the bombing of the British Colonies Club in Trafalgar Square and declares that Misrahi was responsible. The bomb was planted by Robert Misrahi. You heard the rest of that quote from Peter. But he says quite clearly in this book, published by Methuen, one of the oldest and most respectable publishers in Britain, the bomb was planted by Robert Misrahi. The above is only a taste of the information provided by the Jewish history professor. If he and his publishers were not certain they had cast iron evidence to back up that and other allegations of serious criminality against Misrahi, they would never have published such material. No legal action was launched or even threatened by Misrahi. If Professor Cesarani could find evidence to back up his allegations of terrorist criminality against Misrahi, why Scotland Yard, with its much greater resources, cannot do the same and more? You claim that the resources of your department are too overstretched, averting the threat of current Muslim terrorism, to contemplate investigating a Jewish terrorist murderer active against the British people, servicemen and civilians in the late 1940s. But how would you and your family and colleagues feel if you were killed in a terrorist attack where the perpetrators were not arrested at the time, but where, decades later, information came to light as to the identity of at least one of your killers, but which somebody like you refused to follow up because he and his department were too busy? That would be regarded, rightly, as a gross betrayal of one generation of public servants by another. The families and colleagues of the victims of Misrahi and his Stern gang feel exactly that. We have a further response to your too busy claim. One of the supporters of our group, a lad of 21, found himself last year being pursued by Special Branch and or other counter-terrorism detectives who pursued him, who pressured him to become an informer on the right-wing nationalist political parties with which he is associated. Our organisation is non-party political, and I, Martin Webster, have not been a member of any party since 1983. The lad was visited at his home, followed in the street, bombarded with text messages, and generally harassed by officers who offered him payments in cash, in kind, and even protection from prosecution if arrested during political activities. When he refused to submit to these pressures, he was then subjected to harassment by officers acting on behalf of the Prevent organisation, who demanded that he participate in its anti-extremist programme. He refused on the grounds that he is not a terrorist, nor pro-terrorism. As a result of his refusal to be bullied, the Prevent officers persuaded the national leadership of the Boys Brigade to expel him as a junior leader of his local troop, to which he had belonged since his boyhood. They preferred no charge against him, which is contrary to the fundamental principle of English law, natural justice. The troop is attached to his local Baptist church, which he and his family have attended for many years. You will be hearing further about this matter in a separate, private, non-organisational letter. If your department of the police can waste countless man-hours of that kind of petty bullying, yet cannot find the time to investigate a terrorist bomber, then there is something seriously wrong with your and your superiors' priorities and sense of justice. It is with that thought in mind that we draw your attention to a feeling on the part of many of our supporters that your decision may have been influenced not just by the factors which you deployed in your letter, but by the fact that you and other of the most senior officers of the Metropolitan Police, Greater Manchester Police and other English constabularies, as well as Police Scotland, attend gala fundraising banquets organised by the Community Security Trust, CST, the private security organisation serving the Jewish community in the UK. As you will know, the CST was formed as an initiative of the Board of Deputies of British Jews. The Board of Deputies of British Jews is Britain's premier Zionist organisation whose published objectives declare that it exists to protect, quote, the well-being and good name of the State of Israel. At these banquets, senior police officers socialise with CST leaders, all ardent Zionists, at least one of whom has served jail time for a notorious city shares fraud. You remember Guinness shares fraud? Yeah. In addition, the police service provides training for CST operatives and maintains an ongoing liaison with the organisation which constitutes an unprecedented politically orientated private police force. The police-CST relationship is, in our view, entirely improper. It is unhealthy for British society generally, and is a source of danger for citizens who are not pro-Zionist. It is a relationship which offends against British policing traditions and violates the spirit of the oath which you and all your fellow police officers took when you passed out of Hendon or other police training schools. Quote, "You oathed to uphold the law without fear or favour, showing malice or ill will towards none." We invite you to reconsider your decision. And below me down, after weeks and weeks and weeks of waiting, they have reconsidered. They're not saying, see if I can find the letter from, they're not saying that they will institute, but their last letter was quite definite and final that they had decided that they weren't going to do it. Amongst all this paperwork here, I've got it, and I'll probably find it as we're all leaving. See if I can find it here. It doesn't matter. But in the letter which I received just a week or so ago, this Commander Hayden said that they are rereading and reconsidering our representations, and that they will send me a more full and substantive reply. That was the substance of it, wasn't it? In due course. What that means is that we put enough in our letter about police involvement with Zionist organisations and about the additional information that we got, in addition to the MI5 files, whose content they didn't dispute. In addition, of course, I think it came as a surprise to them, they're probably not very well read, all of them at any rate at Scotland Yard, about Professor Cesarani's book, where he openly says in a published tome that's in every history library around the world now, that Robert Misrahi planted the bomb at that club. And if they could find the evidence for it, why can't the police? And I think what they've got now is they're putting all of our evidence, plus any other evidence they can dig up, to Treasury solicitors. These are the brightest of the legal team in Whitehall. I'll give you just a slight example of this. I wrote a pamphlet which was semi-anonymous. The MW appeared all over it, about the police being subverted by the multiracial cult idea. And I got hold of quite a precious tome called the Police Constabulary, which you can only get by ordering in person from an address somewhere out in Buckinghamshire, somewhere or other, and it's got the name and work address of every single police officer in the country above constable. And we had a support. I was then out of active nationalist politics, that's as I wasn't a member of any party political organisation at all, but I still had my feet in the nationalist pool. And I had a supporter who said, look, if you can find somebody, this is before computers and were readily available, and the facilities you can get for easily printing up envelopes. He said, if you can find somebody to type out the labels, I'll pay for the mailing for 2,000 or 3,000 of you mark off on the almanac the people you think ought to get this leaflet. And all on the same day, all of those cops in every police force in the country, the air, the civil air police, the canals. Did you know the canals have got their own police? Well, they have. And a chief constable too. The Scottish police, every single police force in the country, several layers down of their their county-wide leaderships. They got them all on the same day. And they went potty. And we had this mailed out from there's a British monarch address. Some of you probably know the British monarch, Company. The British Monomark Company requires a base address. They won't just let somebody come off the street and give no address. And I have a friend, a nationalist friend who was in the NF in the old days, down at Southwark. He's now moved out to East Anglia. And he said, oh, well, you can use my address. So the police rushed to British Monarch. What's the base address for this? Found Jeremy Lepore Power, the Old Mill Farm, Garboldersham, or as they say locally, Garblesham. And one morning, and it happened to be just on the fortnight before his auntie, who was living with him, was dying of Alzheimer's, was having a very bad night. And he just got into bed at 6 o'clock in the morning after looking after her, when bash, his kitchen door broke open. 20 policemen, this is in Garboldersham, 20 policemen, they were really upset by that leaflet. Bashed through the door, arrested him, took him to Thetford, subjected him to questioning. Eventually, they found in his car a letter from me referring to it, because they didn't find any evidence anywhere in the rest of the house, but he stupidly kept a letter from me about it. And he said, they opened the letter and said, oh, it's Marty. Oh. But the whole point is that the people of Garboldersham have never seen 4 policemen on foot together in Garboldersham in living memory. There were 14 police cars down the Old Mill Farm Lane. They've never seen it. In the shop were talking about it, and he said he went into the village grocer's there. The police had been gossiping around the village, and one old duck in the front that didn't recognise Jeremy then said, yeah, and they do say he's a Nazi. But there was no prosecution. No prosecution. And Jeremy got a bit aerated by this and kept on pressing, oh, what's going on? You've raided my home, broken my front door, terrified me and my auntie who's in the process of dying of Alzheimer's disease. What's going on? And they wouldn't prosecute. And eventually they referred the papers to the people I mentioned to you a little earlier, the Treasury solicitors. These are the brightest legal eagles in the profession. And after waiting for months for ordinary solicitors not to come to any firm conclusion, the Treasury solicitors within a fortnight got back to him and said, there's nothing illegal in this. He's not inciting racial hatred. I worded my stuff very carefully. And he's not inciting disaffection for Crown officers. You know, it can be a crime if you incite people like policemen or soldiers to disobey their oath. In fact, I said in my editorial, political ideas come and go. Chief police officers shouldn't take any notice of ideologies. They should be there to uphold the law, because political fashions change. And if they jump onto the bandwagon of one particular political ideal, then shortly that ideal is going to go out of fashion and they're going to be left hanging out on the washing line. So in fact, I argued against, in my editorial, subverting police independence, and complained about the establishment of private police forces with the help of the British police, like the Community Securities Trust. So the Treasury solicitor said within a fortnight, even less, there's nothing here at all. So no written apology to Jeremy up in Garboldersham, nothing. So there are areas which we can smite our enemy. The CST, they're going, this Shomrin, they've got in the more orthodox areas in Hackney and Stoke Newington. You've got the CST, which got patrols that look like police patrols going on in Golders Green and other places, and also in Manchester, you know, and also I think in Glasgow. These police forces are illegal. But we set up this campaign to remember British war heroes, not only because objectively all our men and women, soldiers, sailors, airmen, public servants, civil servants, whoever they are, if they died in the service of the Crown, we have a duty to honour them. And just because these Jewish war criminals belong to organisations that are now very powerful in Britain, and they're bombing us with money and media patronage and with debt, as Peter mentioned. Peter Oborn wrote and did a wonderful movie, I think on Channel 4, about how a large number of conservative associations are absolutely reliant on, quote, donations, unquote, from Jewish... They've got billionaires, numerous of them, not just Green, but there's numerous other. There's somebody from Finland who's got British nationality now. There's a thing called the Jewish Leadership Council. You can only belong to it if you're a billionaire.
And Jewish.
Well, yes, of course. And these people, the Conservative Party couldn't run the way it runs, and to an extent, at least the old Labour Party couldn't run the way it runs if it wasn't getting huge tranches at election times of Jewish money. And so these politicians today think, oh, we've got a general election coming up, we've got these bloody people demanding that we prosecute Misrahi or other Jewish war. This is going to upset our donors. Better we keep it quiet. Just say no. And then it gets Sir Humphrey to deal with it. And this is another area in which we can attack the enemy. But I do say to all of us here, and to other people who may see this later on, we've got to choose our targets carefully and not stray beyond into extraneous, less provable or more polemical areas. There are plenty, providing we've got our crosshairs on particular targets, we can shoot them, we can pick them off. But we must keep to those defined targets and not indulge ourselves in hyperbole that doesn't lead anywhere at all. We've We know who the targets are, and we just have to keep shooting at them. Now that's the end of my political polemic now. What I wanted to do was to give some thanks to those people on the committee of the campaign who have worked. And I would like to pay a particular thank you to 3 people on whom our efforts in the future are going to depend more and more and more. And that is on the internet technology side of things, the website that we've just got launched, the Facebook page. And there are 3 people, Tony Martin here, Tony Avery behind the camera there, now filming, and Kevin Lazelle. These are 3 people I think you ought to give a round of applause. I'm too old to bother with Facebook and tweets and all that sort of thing. It's very distracting, I find. I find too much of my time is wasted sitting in front of my desktop computer, let alone walking around with a tweet in my pocket. So I give that a miss and I leave it to other people to tweet as they may. But Tony Martin said to me something which struck me very slightly. If you're not on the social media, you don't exist. And so, I'm afraid, despite my feelings, we've got to exist. Therefore, as long as somebody else does it. And the fact that we exist in a much more profound way now than we did this time last year is because of those 3 people. And I'd like to thank them very much. I've also got to report on financial matters to you, though I'm not the treasurer. Originally, you may remember that Richard very kindly agreed to be our treasurer, then through his own political commitments, and he couldn't continue with that.
I was going to get the back to hand it round.
Oh yes, no, don't worry. We'll sort that out in just a minute. And we took a very good collection. I think after we paid our contribution to the hire of the room, something like I forget the precise figure now, is it something between £800 and £900?
A bit more, 940.
£940. So we've still got that, though we have headed off our campaign quite rightly on chasing up this preacher and honouring the people who he killed.
Bullets, not placards, bullets, not placards.
Yes. There are other heroes that we must also remember. And there's one that I've mentioned once or twice before in correspondence with colleagues, which I'd like you to think about. In order to pursue this peace agreement made between the British government and the IRA a few years ago, quite a lot of our very brave boys have not only been put up for public trial and persecution, but also very brave people who acted in intelligence roles. And I hear in particular, though he was mentioned at the time, he's forgotten now, is a young man called Captain Nairak, who was a Catholic actually, Ampleforth School I think in Yorkshire. He was in the Guards and then went to the SAS and then went into deep security. And they caught him and they tortured him for a long, long time. He didn't spill any beans at all, how he put up, because the IRA were no mean hand at torture. And eventually his body was chopped up and fed to pigs. And much as I'd like to pursue our Zionist friends, I think, objectively speaking, if we are here to honour forgotten British heroes, we should remember Captain Naira.
Yeah.
That is going to be the next thing on our agenda. How we go about it, where we go about it, is things for the committee of this body to discuss when we next have a meeting.
Let's say that he's a hard worker, he's a witty raconteur, he's an articulate, eloquent, erudite critic of the powers that be, or rather the powers that should not be. He hits the enemy at the weakest points. A Zionist journalist, editor actually, working for a mainstream newspaper, said he would not publish a letter by Martin Webster because hell would freeze over first before he published the letter by that vicious, anti-Semitic, fascist old git. Well, he may be a vicious, anti-Semitic, fascist old git, but he's vicious, anti-Semitic, fascist old git. Now, political ideas, as we've heard, come and go. Fashions come and go. And political ideologies come and go. And my friends, liberalism is going. And the world is changing. The world is waking up. I sense a sea change. And we saw it today in that large crowd of passers-by who listened, stopped and listened and applauded. For we are now the spirit of the age. So it's important for us to keep testing the water, to keep pushing the envelope, keep testing the enemy, keep pressing the Overton window. It was Voltaire who said, if you want to see who rules the world, see who you can't criticise. Those who rule the world, those who you can't criticise. They use various weapons to keep us silent, to keep us from criticising them. And these weapons all derive from their control over money. And I call these weapons the 5 B's. 5 B's. Bribery, blackmail, bullying, brainwashing and bullshit. But we're not taking any more of it. We'll keep on criticising them. on speaking the truth. We'll keep on waking people up. And we will never give up. We'll never give in. Come the day. We will win. Thank you very much.